So this is a hub motor installation. This is the Rising Sun rated at 500 watts, but apparently it goes to far more than that. Looking at it being more along the lines of 600 or 700. You need to configure it with the spacers that come with it. So there's 2 anti-spin bars and a whole bunch of spacers. So a couple of the spacers are anti-spin, but for this we use both the bars and the spacers are used as spacers. So there's a spacer and an anti-spin on the left, and then there's 2 spacers and an anti-spin on the right. So as you can see here, the anti-spin goes on first, then it goes a spacer, then an anti-spin, because the anti-spins have to be flush against the aluminium bar. For goodness sake. Yeah, so the spacer goes on there, and then there's 2, that was the anti-spin bar, then there's 2 spacers that go on, a smaller spacer and a larger spacer. I'm just loosening these off so that I can get the wheel in. So that's me got the spacer on, going to push it across, or the anti-spin bar rather, that I keep getting mixed up with. I can't quite remember the configuration of them, but which spacers go where, they're listed in the notes on the drawings. So yeah, there's 2 spacers there, then the aluminium flat bar goes on. So the anti-spin on the right hand side. So on both bars, the anti-spin's on the right hand side, it's not symmetrical. This allows the hub motor to be centered within the chassis. That's why it's a bit lopsided. And I think I've got a spacer or a washer on there, and then that goes on. It shouldn't really matter how you do it, as long as you get the wheel as central as possible. You could even purchase more washers to get it millimeter perfect. but I think I just used the one that came in the pack of this Ryzen Sun 200mm by 60mm wide motor, which seems to be pretty good. I think it's used in the Fluid scooters and a few other brands as well. You can tell this hub motor because the edges of the tire aren't rounded off, which I figure is possibly not that good for when you're cornering. It's gonna, if you go right at the angle, you're gonna get less grip, but that might wear down after a while and round off a bit. Here's me just tightening everything up. You have to make sure, although I've got little plates that go onto the end to secure the anti-spin bars, you have to make sure that the hub motor bolts are extremely tight. You can't afford to have the hub motor spin the spindle rather than the wheel, and the force it's going through is huge, so you have to have them so tight. Sure, the anti-spin bars are there, but they don't seem the greatest because it's not flattened off that well on the spindle, and there's a bit of a gap on the bar between the spindle and the bar, so to me it looked like a possibility was that it could just churn through the hole in the gap in the spin bar, and then you've got a destroyed motor because it's just going to rip the wires out of the motor and out of the controller and everything. So this is me tightening it, but you want to really do it so that you can't tighten it anymore. Just tightening up the aluminium bar within the main chassis. You want to make sure those anti-spin bars are perfectly horizontal and centered on the aluminium flat bars, just like that, how you see here, because you need to use these to stop it spinning. You just tap them on with a hammer. These do go on quite tight. These, along with pretty much every other part, is printed at 100% infill, just for strength. So just putting one on each side. No, they're not symmetrical, they're positioning. You really have to tighten these up mega. super tight. There's me just showing you where the wires go. I think there's a slot. The slots are quite neat for these, so you feed them through. So there's one slot at this side, that's for all the phase and Hall wires from the motor. They go up the left hand side of the scooter, and on the other side, as you saw on the braking video, there's two holes, one to go into the chassis on the right hand side and one to come out and into the braking transition piece. That's me just feeding them in. You gotta feed the large ones in and then the small ones in. They do all fit, you just have to sort of split it up as you're feeding them in, and that runs along the left hand side, tight up against the left hand side of the battery compartment. There are little up stands within it that go against the aluminium frame. It goes behind those, away from the batteries, so everything's spaced out. So you've got all of these wires on the left hand side, and then you've got all the battery power on the right hand side to keep them away from each other. That's me just feeding it in. Unfortunately it has to loop over the top, but I just tie that with a one of those plastic tie backs.